Homelessness in New York City has escalated to unprecedented levels, marking a crisis reminiscent of the Great Depression. The numbers paint a grim picture. Each night, approximately 176,547 people in the city lack a permanent place to live. This is not just a statistic. It is a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in real time, fueled not only by economic hardship, soaring rent prices, and policy failures, but also by deep-rooted corruption that continues to worsen the crisis. Keep watching as we explore how corruption is fueling New York City's homeless crisis. The latest poverty report from Robin Hood and Columbia University reveals that 1 in 4 New Yorkers now live in poverty. This rate is nearly double the national average, reflecting the ever-widening economic gap in the city. Prices at grocery stores continue to climb, while wages struggle to keep pace. In fact, costs in New York City have surged by 131%, whereas median earnings have increased by only 71%. This imbalance means that even those with jobs struggle to afford basic needs, pushing more people toward homelessness. As food pantries across the city report overwhelming demand, it is evident that financial insecurity is affecting even middle-class families who were once relatively stable. The housing market in New York City has become an insurmountable obstacle for many, with rent prices skyrocketing and a severe shortage of affordable housing. Even those earning a steady income find themselves on the verge of displacement. Between 2005 and 2015, rent in New York City surged by 28%, while wages saw a meager 9% increase, exacerbating the financial strain on low-income families. The lack of new housing developments in wealthier neighborhoods exacerbates the issue, preventing supply from meeting demand. Instead of addressing this crisis with comprehensive reforms, city leaders continue to enforce restrictive zoning laws that hinder construction of high-density, modern housing. This, in turn, forces families to compete for a limited number of apartments, driving prices even higher. $14.9 billion spent, but the homeless crisis keeps growing. As homelessness rises, so does a strain on city resources. New York City's right to shelter mandate legally obligates the government to provide temporary housing to all who need it. While this policy is essential in ensuring that individuals and families are not left entirely without shelter, it has placed an enormous financial burden on the city. Over the past 2 years, New York City has spent a staggering $14.9 billion on migrant aid. Despite these efforts, shelters remain overcrowded, and the city's homeless population continues to grow. Many shelters are at capacity, forcing the city to house migrants and long-term homeless individuals in hotels, office buildings, and even converted school gymnasiums. This has led to frustration among longtime residents who feel that their own needs are being overlooked in favor of newcomers. The debate over resource allocation has become increasingly contentious, with many questioning the sustainability of the current system. Many New Yorkers now find themselves forced into impossible choices: paying rent or buying food, covering medical bills, or purchasing essential school supplies for their children. A significant portion of the city's population is now relying on credit cards or loans just to make ends meet, deepening their financial instability. As a result, homelessness is no longer a crisis that affects only the visibly destitute. It is creeping into the lives of those who once felt secure: teachers, healthcare workers, and public servants. People who contribute significantly to the fabric of the city are now among those struggling to find stable housing. Inside the corrupt empire of New York City's shelter system, where does the money go? By March 2025, New York City shelter system had ballooned into a staggering $4.1 billion industry, with increasing scrutiny on the way funds are allocated and the effectiveness of its operations. While shelters are undeniably a critical component in addressing homelessness, the vast sums of money flowing into the system have created opportunities for profiteering and waste, often at the expense of those it is meant to serve. The expansion of the shelter system has been driven by the city's legal obligation to provide emergency housing to anyone who requests it. This right to shelter mandate, while an essential safeguard against street homelessness, has also turned the system into a lucrative market for private operators, nonprofits, and developers. Many of these organizations receive city contracts worth millions of dollars, yet reports frequently surface of mismanagement, lack of oversight, and outright fraud. Numerous shelters are operated by for-profit entities with little accountability, charging exorbitant rates for substandard services. In some cases, owners of these shelters have been exposed for financial improprieties, including overbilling the city, engaging in self-dealing, or misusing funds meant for housing and support services. One of the most glaring examples of systemic failure is the proliferation of poorly managed facilities, where residents are subjected to unsafe and unsanitary conditions. Numerous accounts from shelter residents describe rat infestations, mold-ridden walls, and security lapses that expose individuals to violence and theft. Despite billions of dollars being funneled into the system, many shelters continue to operate under conditions that barely meet basic living standards. A significant portion of funds is often absorbed by administrative costs, executive salaries, and leasing deals that prioritize profits over people. The financial entanglement between the city and shelter operators has also given rise to a troubling trend of political patronage and conflict of interest. Investigations have revealed that some shelter providers have deep political ties, receiving contracts despite histories of poor performance. This has led to a system where oversight is often lax, as city officials either fail to enforce accountability measures or turn a blind eye to glaring inefficiencies. The lack of transparency in the contracting process further exacerbates these issues, making it difficult to determine how taxpayer dollars are being spent and whether they are yielding meaningful outcomes. The shelter scam. Who really profits from New York City's homeless crisis? Another alarming issue is the cost inefficiency of the shelter system. On average, the city spends tens of thousands of dollars per year on each shelter resident, often exceeding the cost of permanent housing solutions. Yet, instead of investing heavily in long-term affordable housing or supportive housing programs, the city continues to pour money into a shelter industry that thrives on perpetual demand. Some critics argue that this approach prioritizes temporary fixes over sustainable solutions, ensuring that homelessness remains a persistent crisis rather than one that is meaningfully addressed. The incentives within the system discourage rapid rehousing efforts because many shelter providers profit from keeping occupancy rates high. The longer individuals stay in shelters, the more money these operators make, creating a perverse incentive structure that runs counter to the ultimate goal of ending homelessness. Efforts to reform the system have often been met with resistance from those who benefit from its dysfunction. Proposals to shift funding away from shelters toward permanent housing solutions are frequently derailed by entrenched interests that rely on the shelter industry for their livelihood. This resistance has made it difficult for the city to transition towards more effective models, such as Housing First, which prioritizes stable, long-term housing with supportive services. Studies have consistently shown that providing permanent housing is not only more humane, but also more cost-effective in the long run. Yet, despite this evidence, New York continues to invest disproportionately in a shelter system that serves as a stopgap rather than a solution. The consequences of this broken system are felt most acutely by those who depend on it: families with children, individuals struggling with mental illness, and those fleeing domestic violence often find themselves trapped in an expensive and inefficient bureaucratic maze. Rather than receiving the support they need to transition out of homelessness, they are subjected to a cycle of instability that can stretch on for years. The trauma of prolonged shelter stays, coupled with the poor conditions of many facilities, further exacerbates the challenges faced by those trying to rebuild their lives. The dark side of the American dream. Why even the middle class can't afford to live here. New York City, home to millions chasing the American dream, has seen its economic disparities deepen in recent years. Nearly 25% of New Yorkers live below the poverty line, almost double the national average. This staggering figure represents over 2 million residents struggling to afford food, housing, and health care. Even more distressing, child poverty has reached 31%, meaning that 1 in 4 children in the city faces daily financial hardship. These numbers highlight a fundamental question. How can a city known for its wealth and economic power leave so many of its residents behind? The consequences of poverty in New York are severe and far-reaching. Families facing economic hardship are forced to make impossible choices: pay rent or buy groceries, afford transportation or access health care. These dilemmas not only affect day-to-day survival, but also have lasting impacts on education and employment opportunities. Children growing up in poverty often experience food insecurity, lack of medical care, and inadequate schooling, leading to a cycle that is incredibly difficult to break. The psychological toll of financial instability cannot be understated either. Stress, anxiety, and depression become part of daily life for those struggling to make ends meet, making it even harder for individuals to lift themselves out of poverty. While poverty itself is a crisis, it is exacerbated by the city's astronomical cost of living. New York City consistently ranks among the most expensive places to live in the world, with housing being the most pressing financial burden. Renting a modest apartment in a safe neighborhood can easily cost upwards of $3,000 per month. Homeownership, often considered a marker of financial stability, is even further out of reach, with property prices soaring into the millions. This means that for many, financial hardship is not due to a lack of work ethic or ambition, but rather an unrelenting economic environment where wages fail to keep pace with expenses. The real cost of living in New York City. Can you afford the American dream? Everyday necessities also come with a hefty price tag. Groceries, utilities, and transportation are all significantly more expensive than in most other American cities. A simple lunch can cost $20, while a cup of coffee often sets someone back $5. These seemingly minor expenses quickly add up, making it nearly impossible for low-income workers and even many middle-class residents to save for the future. Consider Sarah, a recent college graduate earning $50,000 a year, with $3,200 going toward rent, $500 for groceries, and $200 for transportation. She has little left for health care, entertainment, or savings. This financial pressure forces many to either live paycheck to paycheck or leave the city altogether in search of more affordable life elsewhere. Adding to the financial burden is the relentless rise of inflation. As of May 2024, the Consumer Price Index, CPIU, for the New York-Newark Jersey City metropolitan area had increased by 2.4% in a single month, contributing to a 5.1% rise over the past year. Housing costs, which were already a significant strain, saw an additional 5.8% increase year over year. For a renter paying $2,000 per month, this could mean an additional $100, a seemingly small but crucial amount that can be the difference between financial stability and economic hardship. Beyond housing, other everyday expenses have surged as well. Recreation costs, including gym memberships and movie tickets, have risen by 6.3%, making leisure activities increasingly unaffordable for many New Yorkers. These rising costs are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They translate into real-life struggles for millions. Low-income workers, already struggling to keep up, find themselves further stretched as wages fail to match inflation. The burden is particularly heavy for families with children, who must account for not just housing and food, but also childcare, education, and health care. Many residents are left with little choice but to cut back on essential expenses, making sacrifices that further impact their long-term financial well-being. As the cost of living continues to rise, so does the urgency for meaningful policy interventions. Addressing the crisis of affordability in New York City requires a multifaceted approach, including expanding affordable housing, increasing wages to reflect the real cost of living, and implementing stronger social safety nets for those in need. Without these measures, the city risks becoming an exclusive enclave for the wealthy, leaving behind the very people who make it vibrant, diverse, and dynamic.